The WTA season is over, and Iga Swiatek, year-end number one, champion at the WTA Finals in Cancun, accomplishing both of those things in one foul swoop. Beating Jessica Pegula in the final, 6-1, 6-0. Iga dropped 20 games, record low, 20 games at the finals with the top 8 players. Didn't come remotely close to losing a single match. Insane. So did this wrap up WTA Player of the Year for Iga? Usually this whole conversation, this whole debate, which is, always just comes down to, let me define it, most successful player, like whose season is most desirable. That's essentially what the question is. And usually this comes down to who wins the most major titles. In rare cases, can somebody win more major titles and not be the obvious player of the year, right? In this case, slam titles between Swiatek and Sabalenka is 1-1, and that's usually where we have a much more interesting discussion. Here is Sabalenka's argument. It is that she was there at the end of all 4 majors. It's basically like, okay, majors are the most important, titles are tied, but one player contended each and every one, and one of them didn't. And it doesn't matter how you feel about some of the losses that Sabalenka took at these majors. And some of them felt very, very disappointing, whether she blew a lead or her performance wasn't up to snuff. Yeah, they felt disappointing, but that is still better, even if it doesn't necessarily feel better in the moment. When you look back at it, it's still better to be in those positions and then lose than to not be in those positions, because you lost before you were able to get to that high-stakes match at the end of a major, right? That is plain and simple the argument for Sabalenka, that she played better at the majors. The argument for Swiatek, yeah, it goes a lot longer. The general rule is if majors are tied, you go to big titles. And just digging into that, Swiatek leading that 3-2. It's kind of more like 3.5-2. Like the WTA Finals means a little bit more than your average Masters 1000. So I would say Iga kind of leads in big titles 3.5-2. And then you look at total titles and it's 6-3. And, titles, like winning titles has to mean something. It has to mean more than just making runs or just coming close. I mean, that is your goal each and every week when you show up to an event. Your goal, if you're a Swiatek or a Sabalenka, is to lift the trophy at the end. Titles matter. And Iga was just better in the titles category, whether you distill it down to big titles or total titles. And then if you just look at who is better at winning matches, if you take every match is just the same, let's say you had no idea if it was a 250 or a major, you just took every match as the same, you still end up with Swiatek, whose win rate was 85% to Sabalenka's 81%, and total wins was 68-55. So Swiatek played a little bit more, and when she did play, she won a little bit more. Swiatek just has more behind her, and I think Iga has a better resume than Sabalenka in 2023. She's my player of the year. I don't think just the runs at the majors are enough for Sabalenka to offset the advantage that Swiatek has in everything I mentioned. Not quite enough for me. And big picture, Swiatek should be really, really, really proud of what she did this year. I mean, tough circumstances to have to follow up what she did in 2022. Seriously, because, you set an expectation for yourself and, from everybody else that you're going to dominate. And it's a tough expectation to live with, honestly. Psychologically, it's just difficult. You feel like you're failing even when you're doing pretty well. And I think that's kind of probably how Iga felt. Maybe the pressure got to her at a couple of the majors. There were a lot of lessons learned. She's still very young. There's still a lot of room for development in her game. But notice, as soon as Sabalenka caught her and became number one, that was kind of the turning point for Iga. And quite frankly, and I think this should be mentioned in this conversation, if we were looking at player of the year after the U.S. Open, I actually think Sabalenka had the better argument because there was no big titles advantage for Iga. And there was a slim titles advantage for Iga, but honestly, Warsaw just honestly wasn't all that impressive. Now, obviously, I said obviously 4 times there in 2 seconds, but Swiatek is playing in her home country, and it means a lot to her, and she's going to play that event, but that's just not a great field, and it's players who she simply just should beat. So you kind of throw that out because the rest of the titles we're looking at are really kind of good, solid, impressive titles by the standard of a top 3 player, right? And with Sabalenka's superior consistency at the majors, I actually thought she had it. But Iga winning 11 matches in a row, tacking on 2 big titles, one of them being the WTA Finals, that seals it for me. Kind of seemed like not being number one and not having Sabalenka, right on her tail and having to answer questions about all that stuff, seems like it freed her up a little bit. Now 2024, it's all about breaking that WTA Finals curse that got the better of Muguruza and Caroline Garcia. I feel like we can trust Swiatek to do that. Hope you enjoyed. Don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you next time.